In the deepest, darkest corner of the Andromeda sector, where even the stars seemed to dim in disgust, sat Vortak Maximum Security Prison. Built into the jagged surface of asteroid Grimhold 7, this facility was the galaxy's way of saying, "We've given up on you completely." The asteroid itself looked like someone had taken a perfectly good rock and beaten it senseless with a plasma hammer for several centuries, which, coincidentally, was exactly what the Galactic Council had done when they decided this chunk of space debris would make the perfect home for their most dangerous criminals. The prison's exterior was a masterpiece of intimidation. Massive energy barriers crackled around the perimeter, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't designed to vaporize anything that came within 50 meters. Guard towers jutted from the rock like metallic tumors, each bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon. The whole structure seemed to crouch against the asteroid's surface, as if it were trying to burrow deeper into the rock to escape the universe's judgment. Inside, the conditions were, well, let's just say the galaxy's tourism board would never approve this place for a vacation destination. The air recycling system had been designed by the lowest bidder, which meant breathing felt like gargling with industrial lubricant. The gravity generators were set to uncomfortably heavy, ensuring that every step felt like you were carrying a Regalian elephant on your back. The walls wept condensation that no one dared to analyze, and the lighting flickered with the rhythm of a dying star. Most prisoners lasted about 3 standard months before they either died, went insane, or both. The record holder, a particularly stubborn Zephyrian assassin named Skarn 9, had survived exactly 4 months and 17 days before he started trying to eat the walls. The guards found him one morning, convinced he was a decorative plant, and talking to imaginary butterflies. They still kept him in solitary, partly for his own safety, but mostly because watching him water himself with prison soup had become their favorite entertainment. Which brings us to Warden Bruthok, a being so thoroughly unpleasant that his own mother had legally changed her name to avoid association. Standing 8 feet tall on 4 muscular legs, with arms that could crush durasteel, and a face that looked like it had been carved from pure malice, Bruthok was the perfect administrator for a facility designed to break souls. His eyes were the color of dying nebula, and his voice sounded like grinding metal had learned to speak and was very angry about it. Bruthok had earned his position through a combination of ruthless efficiency and creative cruelty. He'd started as a guard on the pleasure planet Hadonis 5, where his idea of crowd control involved asking politely if troublemakers would mind stepping into his discussion chamber. The chamber was soundproof, which was fortunate for everyone involved except the troublemakers. After 17 years of discussions, he'd been promoted to warden of a medium-security facility on the moon of Betax 3. Within 6 months, prisoner fatalities had dropped to 0, mainly because the inmates were too terrified to even think about dying without permission. The Galactic Council had been so impressed with his results that they'd offered him Grimhold 7, the crown jewel of hopelessness. Make them wish they'd never been born, they'd told him during his orientation. Bruthok had looked around at the facility's existing amenities, the torture chambers, the psychological warfare department, the cafeteria that served food designed to make prisoners question their life choices, and had said, "I think I can work with this." Under his management, Grimhold 7 had become the stuff of legends. Pirates told stories about it to frighten their children. Mercenaries used it as a threat during negotiations. "Pay up or we'll make sure you end up in Bruthok's playground," was a phrase that could settle disputes faster than any peace treaty. The prison's reputation was so fearsome that some criminals had actually reformed their lives rather than risk being sent there. The mere mention of Grimhold 7 had reportedly caused a 67% drop in crime rates across 14 star systems, which was great for galactic peace, but terrible for Bruthok's ego, since he didn't get as many opportunities to exercise his creative talents. But today was special. Today Bruthok was getting a new toy. Not just any prisoner, but a Class 15 Deathworld specimen. The transport ship had been sending updates for the past 3 standard days, and each message had made Bruthak's 3 hearts beat faster with anticipation. "Prisoner requires maximum restraint protocols," the first message had read. "Biological capabilities exceed standard containment parameters. Warning! Prisoner has demonstrated unprecedented problem-solving abilities," came the second. "Recommend immediate isolation upon arrival." The third message had been brief but thrilling. "May the gods help us all." Bruthak stood in his office, looking out through the reinforced transparent steel at the landing pad, where the transport would arrive in exactly 47 minutes. His mandibles clicked with excitement as he reviewed the prisoner's file one more time. Class 15 Deathworld. The highest classification in the galaxy. Nothing had ever been classified higher than 12 before this creature had been captured. Whatever was coming to his prison was going to be the crown jewel of his collection, and if it survived longer than 4 months and 17 days, well, that would just make breaking it all the more satisfying. The transport ship Galactic Justice descended through Grimhold 7's atmosphere like a wounded bird that had given up on life. Its hull bore scorch marks from what the pilot's report would later describe as 17 separate escape attempts, 12 of which involved the prisoner somehow getting out of his restraints and asking politely if he could help with navigation. The ship's landing thrusters sputtered and wheezed, suggesting that perhaps the prisoner had also offered mechanical advice that the crew had been too terrified to accept. Warden Bruthak stood on the observation deck, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow light itself. Around him, his elite guard unit, the Grimhold Reapers, shifted nervously in their powered armor. These were beings who had seen nightmares made flesh, who had stared into the abyss so long that the abyss had filed a restraining order, and yet every single one of them was visibly sweating through their environmental suits. "Remember," Bruthak growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been told no and lived to regret it, "this creature is rated Class 15. That means it's more dangerous than a Vorthan plague beast, more cunning than a Cerebellian mind flayer, and more unpredictable than a Zephyrian teenager with daddy issues. Maximum restraint protocols are in effect." Guard Captain Draven, a 7-foot-tall mountain of muscle and bad attitude, nodded grimly. "Sir, we've prepared the heavy containment unit. Force fields, neural dampeners, and gravity restraints set to maximum. If this thing so much as thinks about moving wrong, it'll be crushed flatter than a Rigelian pancake." The transport ship's ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like the universe itself was sighing in resignation. What emerged first were 6 guards in full hazmat suits, moving with the jerky, panicked movements of people who had been traumatized beyond their ability to process reality. Their weapons were drawn, but their hands shook so badly that they posed more danger to each other than to whatever they were supposed to be guarding. "Dear gods," whispered one of the Grimhold Reapers, "look at them, they're broken." The transport guards formed a wide circle around the ramp, their eyes darting everywhere except at whatever was still inside the ship. One of them, a Klaxon security officer whose carapace was usually a proud shade of blue, had turned a sickly yellow-green color that suggested he'd been rethinking his career choices for the past several days. "Prisoner Daniel Reyes," announced the lead transport guard, his voice cracking like a pubescent Altarian. "Classification? Class 15 Deathworld specimen. Approaching the ramp now." The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a photon drop. Even the asteroid's geological activity seemed to pause in anticipation. Bruthak leaned forward, his 3 hearts hammering against his ribcage as he prepared to witness the most dangerous creature the galaxy had ever classified. What stepped off the transport ship was, well, it was about 6 feet tall, which was disappointingly average. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head in all the standard places, which was boringly conventional. Its skin was a brownish color that suggested it had spent time under a star, and its hair was black and somewhat messy, as if it had been sleeping during the journey. The creature, Daniel Reyes, walked down the ramp with the casual confidence of someone heading to a vacation resort. He wasn't struggling against his restraints, which included neural inhibitors, gravity shackles, and enough energy bonds to power a small city. In fact, he seemed to be taking care not to trip over the various restraint cables as he moved. "Wow," Daniel said, his voice carrying the tone of someone genuinely impressed. "This place has really good architecture. I mean, building a prison into an asteroid? That's engineering right there. Must have taken some serious planning." The transport guards flinched, as if he'd screamed threats at them. One of them actually whimpered. Cell Block Commander Severin, a reptilian being whose species had evolved from apex predators and never quite gotten over it, stepped forward. His scaled hide was scarred from countless battles, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had seen every possible way a prisoner could try to escape, murder, or cause mayhem. "Prisoner Reyes," Severin hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air for signs of deception. "I am Commander Severin. You will follow standard processing protocols. Any attempt at resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Daniel looked at him with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Nice to meet you, Commander. I really appreciate you taking the time to handle this personally. I know you guys must be super busy, and I don't want to be any trouble." Severin blinked, then blinked again. In his 17 years of processing dangerous criminals, no one had ever thanked him for doing his job. Most prisoners either cursed him, threatened him, or tried to bite his face off. This was new. "You appreciate?" Severin's voice carried the confusion of someone whose worldview had just been gently nudged off its axis. "Oh, absolutely," Daniel continued, somehow managing to nod enthusiastically despite the neural inhibitor clamped around his neck. "I can see you run a tight ship here. Everything's so organized, everyone knows their job. That's the mark of good leadership right there." The transport guards were now backing away from Daniel as if he had just announced he was carrying a plague. One of them was making small, distressed noises that sounded like a broken air recycling unit. "Sir," the lead transport guard said to Bruthak, "we really need to get going. Like right now, immediately, please." Bruthak was staring at Daniel with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces and not enough corners. "What exactly did this creature do during transport?" He was polite, sir," the guard whispered. "He said please and thank you, and asked about our families. Johnson won't stop crying, and Martinez has requested a transfer to the Psychic Rehabilitation Division." As the transport ship departed with unseemly haste, Severin led Daniel toward the processing center. The human continued to make casual conversation, commenting on the quality of the lighting, the effectiveness of the security measures, and asking whether the guards got good health benefits. "This is highly irregular," Severin muttered to himself. "Prisoners are supposed to be surly, angry, desperate, not whatever this is." The processing center had been designed to break a prisoner's spirit before they even reached their cell. The walls were covered with recordings of previous inmates' screams. The air was kept at an uncomfortably cold temperature, and the lighting was calibrated to cause maximum psychological distress. Daniel looked around with obvious appreciation. "Oh, this is clever. The acoustic design really carries sound well. And the temperature control, that's got to save on energy costs. Very efficient." By the time they reached Isolation Block 7, where they'd prepared Daniel's luxury cell, half the guards were questioning their career choices, and the other half were wondering if they'd accidentally ingested hallucinogens. The cell was the worst they had to offer. 3 feet by 6 feet, with a metal slab for a bed, a waste disposal unit that barely functioned, and lighting that flickered between barely adequate and completely absent. The walls were covered with the desperate scratchings of previous occupants, most of whom had not survived their stay. Daniel stepped inside and looked around with the expression of someone who had just been shown a 5-star hotel suite. "This is perfect. Really, you guys have thought of everything. The compact design, the minimalist decor, even the historical artwork on the walls. I can't thank you enough." As the cell door slammed shut with a finality that had crushed the hopes of countless prisoners, Daniel settled onto his metal slab and smiled at the confused guards watching him through the observation window. "Have a great day, everyone," he called out cheerfully. "If you need anything, just let me know." Commander Severin stood in the corridor, staring at the human through the reinforced transparent steel, his reptilian brain struggling to process what he had just witnessed. In 17 years of handling the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, He had never encountered anything quite like this, and somewhere deep in his scaled chest, he felt the first stirrings of what could only be described as concern. Not for the safety of the prison, but for the possibility that they had just locked up the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, something that was genuinely, inexplicably nice. It started on day 3 with Guard Holt's breakfast rounds. Holt was a Tellarian, built like a walking boulder with the personality to match. He'd been working Grimhold 7 for 6 years, and in that time, he'd perfected the art of food delivery without making eye contact, speaking, or acknowledging that prisoners were anything more than numbers that occasionally made noise. "Morning, Holt," came the cheerful voice from cell 447B. "How's your daughter doing with her studies?" Holt froze. In 6 years, no prisoner had ever asked him about his personal life. Most of them didn't even know guards had personal lives. He turned slowly, his rocky features twisted in confusion, to stare at the human who was sitting cross-legged on his metal slab, eating the prison's standard nutrition paste with apparent enjoyment. "How do you know about my daughter?" Holt's voice sounded like gravel being mixed in a cement truck. Daniel looked up from his meal, his expression one of innocent surprise. "Oh, you mentioned her yesterday when you were talking to Guard Faro about the education system on Telluria Prime. She's having trouble with quantum mathematics, right? That's a tough subject." Holt's jaw dropped. He had been talking to Faro about his daughter's struggles with school, but that conversation had taken place 3 corridors away from the isolation block. The human shouldn't have been able to hear it, let alone remember it. She is struggling," Holt admitted, his voice softening despite himself. "The teachers say she's not applying herself, but I think she just needs a different approach." Daniel nodded sagely. "You know, back on Earth, we had a saying, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. Maybe your daughter's brain just works differently. Has anyone tried explaining quantum mechanics through music or art?" "Music?" Holt's confusion was genuine. "What does music have to do with quantum physics?" "Everything's connected," Daniel said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. "Quantum states are like musical harmonies, multiple possibilities existing simultaneously until you observe them, just like how a chord contains multiple notes that create something beautiful together. If she's artistic, she might understand wave functions better through sound waves." 3 days later, Holt's daughter had her first breakthrough in quantum mathematics. Her teacher, following the human's advice, had started using musical analogies to explain particle behavior. Within a week, she'd gone from failing to being the top student in her class. Holt began spending his lunch breaks sitting outside cell 447B, talking to the human about everything from parenting techniques to the best way to season Tellurian rock moss. Other guards started noticing. "It's weird," Guard Faro confided to his partner during their shift change. "Holt's been happy lately, like genuinely happy. When's the last time you saw him smile?" "Never," came the response. "I was starting to think his face was permanently stuck in disapproval mode." The phenomenon spread. Guard Nile, a nervous klaxon who'd been having trouble sleeping since his last promotion, found himself sharing his anxiety with the human during evening rounds. Daniel listened with the attention of someone who genuinely cared, then shared a breathing technique he'd learned from an old Earth meditation master. "It's called the 4-7-8 method," Daniel explained. "Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. It tells your nervous system that you're safe. Works every time." Within a week, Nile was sleeping better than he had in months. Within 2 weeks, he was recommending the technique to other guards. Within 3 weeks, half the prison staff was practicing what they'd started calling the Reyes method for stress management. The most remarkable change came when Daniel somehow acquired a small stash of Earth snacks. Nobody knew how he'd gotten them, since prisoner possessions were strictly controlled and monitored. When asked, Daniel just smiled and said he'd made a trade with someone who appreciated good conversation. The snacks themselves were nothing special by human standards. Peanut butter crackers, dried fruit, some kind of chocolate bar that had seen better days. But to the alien guards, they were exotic treasures from a legendary Deathworld. Daniel distributed them during his daily conversations, always with a story attached. "This chocolate," he told Guard Osik, a hulking Vorlian whose species had never encountered sugar, comes from the cacao plant. We have to ferment the beans, roast them, grind them up, and mix them with other ingredients. It takes weeks to make properly, but it's worth it. Osik bit into the chocolate bar with the caution of someone approaching a potential explosive. His eyes widened as the sweetness hit his taste buds. This is incredible. Your people invest this much effort into food that serves no nutritional purpose. Oh, it serves a purpose, Daniel laughed. It makes people happy. Sometimes that's the most important nutrition of all. Word of the chocolate spread through the guard ranks faster than a plasma fire. Soon guards were volunteering for shifts near the isolation block, hoping to catch Daniel in a generous mood. The human seemed to have an endless supply of earth delicacies, and he was always willing to share them with anyone who stopped by for a chat. Commander Severin first noticed the change during the weekly staff briefing. His guards, normally a collection of barely controlled violence and professional paranoia, were relaxed. They were making jokes, sharing stories, and actually listening to each other instead of planning their next meal or counting down to their next break. Has anyone noticed, Severin asked carefully, that morale seems to be improving? It's the human, Guard Captain Draven said immediately. He's been giving advice, good advice. My wife and I were having problems communicating, and he suggested we try something called active listening. We haven't had a fight in 2 weeks. Severin's scales rippled with confusion. The prisoner is providing marriage counseling? Among other things, Draven continued, he helped Niall with his insomnia, gave Holt parenting advice, and taught half the night shift how to manage stress. Oh, and he makes these things called dad jokes that are terrible but somehow funny. The prison's social hierarchy was shifting in ways that would have been impossible to predict. Guards who had never spoken to each other outside of official duties were now gathering in small groups, sharing stories and techniques they'd learned from their conversations with Daniel. The human had somehow become the social center of Grimhold 7, despite being locked in solitary confinement. The most dramatic change came when Guard Rennick, a Zephyrian whose species was known for their emotional volatility, approached Daniel during evening rounds with tears in his compound eyes. My brother disowned me, Rennick whispered. He said I was a disgrace to the family for working in a prison instead of following our traditional warrior path. Daniel listened in silence, then nodded thoughtfully. Family expectations can be tough. But you know what's really honorable? Protecting society by keeping dangerous people locked up. You're not just a guard, you're a guardian. There's a difference. But he said I was weak for not being a warrior. Who decided that warriors have to carry weapons to be brave? Daniel asked. You face down some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy every day, and you do it to protect people who will never know your name. That's not weak, that's heroic. The conversation lasted an hour. By the end, Rennick was standing straighter, his emotional equilibrium restored by the simple act of being heard and understood. Word of the exchange spread through the guard ranks like wildfire. Within a month, visiting Cell 447 Bay had become an unofficial tradition. Guards would stop by during their breaks, sharing problems both personal and professional. Daniel listened to each one with genuine interest, offering advice that was practical, compassionate, and surprisingly effective. The human had accomplished something that decades of management training and team-building exercises had failed to achieve. He had turned a collection of isolated, bitter guards into something resembling a community, and through it all, Daniel remained cheerful, grateful, and genuinely interested in the well-being of the people who were supposed to be his jailers. Commander Severin found himself standing outside Cell 447B at the end of his shift, watching the human read a book that someone had smuggled in for him. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that it took him a moment to remember that he was looking at the most dangerous prisoner in galactic history. Reyes, he called out softly. Daniel looked up with a smile. Commander, how was your day? Confusing, Severin admitted. Very confusing. And for the first time in his career, Commander Severin found himself genuinely curious about what a prisoner might have to say in response. The trouble started in Cell Block C, when a three-armed Rigelian named Grendok began what could only be described as a tantrum of galactic proportions. Grendok had been serving a life sentence for piracy, murder, and what the courts had classified as aggressive jaywalking with intent to intimidate. He was not accustomed to being ignored. "What's so special about the human?" Grendok screamed at Guard Nile during morning rounds, his three arms gesticulating wildly. "I've been here for 8 years and nobody brings me chocolate. Nobody asks about my feelings. Where's my therapy session?" Nile, who had been having a perfectly peaceful morning thanks to his new 4-7-8 breathing technique, paused in his rounds. "Well, Grendok, when's the last time you asked someone how their day was going?" "I ask people things all the time," Grendok protested. "Just yesterday I asked Jenkins if he wanted to die quickly or slowly." That's not the same thing," Nile explained patiently. "Daniel asks about our families, our problems, our hopes and dreams. You mostly just threaten to eat our organs." The jealousy spread faster than a Betelgeuse flu outbreak. Soon half the prison population was demanding equal treatment, better food, and their own personal therapy sessions. The other half was plotting to eliminate the human who had somehow upset the natural order of prison life. This led to what the guards would later refer to as the Great Cafeteria Incident of Grimhold 7. It started when prisoner Skarn 9, the former Zephyrian assassin who still believed he was a decorative plant, announced that he was going to photosynthesize the human into submission. This confused everyone, including Skarn 9. But it was taken as a declaration of war by the pro-Daniel faction. The anti-Daniel alliance was led by Vorn Ashblade, a Vorlon warrior whose name was exactly as ridiculous as it sounded. Vorn had legally changed his name from Reginald after his third conviction for what the courts had classified as dramatic threatening while wearing insufficient armor. He'd spent considerable effort building a reputation as the most feared prisoner in Cell Block B, and Daniel's popularity was seriously undermining his brand. "This ends now," Vorn declared, pointing dramatically at the isolation block with his cybernetic arm. "That human has made this prison soft, weak. I will not stand for it." The pro-Daniel faction, surprisingly, was led by Globe the Unspeakable, a blob-like creature from the Andromeda system who had been serving time for identity theft and public intoxication. Globe had never actually met Daniel, but had heard about his chocolate-sharing generosity and was determined to protect this source of potential sweets. "Touch human. You deal with Globe," the blob declared, which was surprisingly intimidating coming from something that looked like sentient jelly. The situation escalated when Guard Holt, in an attempt to prevent a prison riot, decided to ask Daniel for advice on conflict resolution. This required bringing Daniel out of isolation for a consultation, which was the first time in Grimhold 7's history that a prisoner had been released from solitary confinement for a management meeting. Daniel emerged from his cell looking like he'd been on a spa retreat rather than in maximum security isolation. He was somehow cleaner than when he'd arrived, his clothes were pressed, and he appeared to have gotten a haircut. Nobody asked how. "Oh, wow," Daniel said, looking around at the tense standoff in the cafeteria. "This is about me, isn't it? I'm so sorry, everyone. I never meant to cause trouble." Vorn Ashblade stepped forward, his cybernetic arm whirring menacingly. "You have made this prison weak, human. I challenge you to single combat." Daniel blinked. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary, but I appreciate the offer. Would you like to talk about what's really bothering you?" What? I mean, you're clearly feeling like your position here is being threatened. That's gotta be stressful. Have you considered that maybe what you're really looking for is acknowledgement and respect?" Vorn's dramatic posture wavered slightly. I am the most feared prisoner in Cell Block B, and that's an achievement," Daniel said sincerely. "It takes real commitment to build that kind of reputation. But fear is exhausting to maintain, isn't it? Wouldn't it be nice to just relax sometimes?" Within 20 minutes, Daniel had somehow convinced Vorn to sit down and discuss his feelings about leadership, respect, and the emotional toll of maintaining a fearsome reputation. The conversation ended with Vorn admitting that he'd always wanted to try pottery, and Daniel promising to see if the guards could arrange art therapy sessions. The anti-Daniel alliance collapsed immediately. Globe the Unspeakable declared victory and demanded chocolate as tribute. This was when Warden Bruthak discovered that his guards were not just talking to the human, they were actively protecting him. He found Guard Captain Draven standing outside cell 447B with a tray of what appeared to be actual food, not the standard nutrition paste. Draven! Bruthak's voice carried the tone of someone who had just discovered that his attack dogs were giving belly rubs to burglars. "What exactly are you doing?" "Bringing Daniel his lunch, sir," Draven replied with the casual confidence of someone who had completely forgotten that this was insane. "He mentioned he'd never tried Altarian fruit salad, so I picked some up from the market on my day off." Bruthak stared at the tray, then at his guard captain, then at the human who was visible through the cell's observation window, apparently organizing what looked like a book club with 3 other guards who were crowded around his cell. "You went to the market, on your day off, to buy fruit salad. For a prisoner. He's been helping me with my relationship problems," Draven explained, as if this was the most natural thing in the galaxy. "My wife says I'm a better listener now. Daniel taught me about something called emotional intelligence." "Emotional intelligence," Bruthak repeated slowly. "It's fascinating stuff, sir. Did you know that most conflicts stem from unmet emotional needs rather than actual disagreements? Daniel has this whole theory about how understanding underlying feelings can resolve disputes more effectively than threats or violence." Bruthak felt something that might have been a headache if his species was capable of headaches.
"And you learned this from the Class 15 Deathworld specimen."
"Oh, he doesn't like being called that. He says it makes him sound more dangerous than he is. He prefers Daniel, or the guy from Earth." The situation reached peak absurdity when Daniel somehow convinced the guards to organize the first annual Grimhold 7 Prisoner Guard Friendship Tournament. The event included competitions in chess, trivia, poetry recitation, and something Daniel called charades, which involved acting out concepts without speaking. "It's about building bridges," Daniel explained to Commander Severin, who had been tasked with overseeing the event. "Competition can be collaborative instead of destructive. Plus, it's fun." "Fun," Severin repeated, as if the word was in a foreign language. "You know, enjoyment, happiness, the good feeling you get when you're doing something you like with people you care about." The tournament was a disaster in the most wonderful way possible. Prisoners and guards formed mixed teams, sharing strategies and celebrating each other's victories. Vorn Ashblade, formerly Reginald, discovered he had a talent for poetry and composed a surprisingly moving piece about the loneliness of space travel. Globe the Unspeakable proved to be unbeatable at charades, despite having no recognizable body language. The chess tournament was won by Skarn 9, who had briefly stopped thinking he was a plant and rediscovered his tactical genius. He celebrated by trying to water the chessboard, but everyone agreed it was a step in the right direction. The poetry competition was won by Guard Rennick, whose piece about duty and honor made several prisoners cry. The trivia contest ended in a tie between Daniel and the prison's medical officer, Dr. Malvex, who had bonded over their shared knowledge of anatomy, though for very different reasons. Warden Bruthak observed the entire event from his office, watching through security cameras as his maximum security prison transformed into something resembling a community center. Prisoners were laughing with guards. Guards were sharing food with prisoners. Someone had apparently taught everyone a song from Earth, and they were all singing it together with varying degrees of success. "This is not how prisons are supposed to work," Bruthak muttered to himself, but he couldn't bring himself to stop it. For the first time in his career, he was looking at a facility where nobody was planning an escape, plotting a murder, or trying to start a riot. The tournament ended with Daniel being declared the Friendship Champion, a title that came with a crown made from recycled meal trays and a certificate signed by every guard and prisoner in the facility. Daniel accepted the honor with the same gracious enthusiasm he brought to everything else. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the cafeteria. "This has been the best day I've had in months. You've all made me feel so welcome here." As the crowd dispersed, With prisoners and guards continuing their conversations and making plans for next week's activities, Bruthok realized that Daniel had accomplished something impossible. He had turned Grimhold 7 into a place where people actually wanted to be. The Galactic Council inspection team arrived on a Tuesday morning with all the subtlety of a neutron star collision. Their ship, the Bureaucratic Excellence, descended through Grimhold 7's atmosphere like an omen of doom, bristling with recording equipment, legal documentation, and the kind of grim determination that only comes from a lifetime of finding fault with other people's work. Inspector Isara Vondrak led the team with the enthusiasm of someone whose greatest joy in life was discovering regulation violations. Standing 9 feet tall on 6 spindly legs, with compound eyes that missed nothing and a voice like grinding metal, she had built her career on turning functional institutions into administrative nightmares. Her inspection record was legendary. In 23 years of service, she had never, not once, filed a positive report. "Warden Bruthok," she announced as she clicked across the landing platform, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had memorized every regulation in the Galactic Legal Code. "This is a surprise inspection under Galactic Prison Standards Code 4847B. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why your facility appears to be playing music." Indeed, from somewhere within the prison complex came the unmistakable sound of voices raised in song. It sounded suspiciously like the Earth tune that Daniel had taught everyone during the Friendship Tournament, being performed with alien vocal cords that had never been designed for human melodies. Bruthok, who had been having what he'd started thinking of as a perfectly normal day before remembering that nothing about his job was normal anymore, straightened his massive frame and tried to look like a warden whose prison hadn't been taken over by an epidemic of happiness. "Hi, Inspector," he began, his voice carrying only the slightest hint of panic. "I can explain. We've been implementing some innovative rehabilitation techniques." "Rehabilitation," Inspector Vondrak repeated, as if the word tasted like spoiled Regalian cheese. "This is a maximum security facility, Warden. We don't rehabilitate here. We contain." She clicked forward, her inspection team following like a plague of efficiency experts. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when they passed Guard Station Alpha and discovered Guard Nile sharing his lunch with prisoner 778C, a Klaxon smuggler who was supposed to be in solitary confinement. "Guard," Inspector Vondrak's voice could have frozen plasma. "Explain why you are fraternizing with a prisoner." Nile looked up from his conversation about optimal sleeping positions for beings with exoskeletons. "Oh, hello there. Vex here was having trouble adjusting to the new mattresses we got, so I was sharing some tips Daniel taught me about ergonomic sleeping. Did you know that proper spinal alignment can improve mood and cognitive function by up to 37%? Inspector Vondrak's compound eyes focused with laser intensity. "Who is Daniel?" "Daniel Reyes, the human in cell 447B. He's been helping us with staff development and prisoner relations. Amazing guy. Really changed the whole atmosphere around here." The inspection team moved deeper into the facility with the determined precision of investigators following a trail of evidence. What they found defied every assumption they'd ever made about maximum security prisons. In Cell Block C, they discovered Vorn Ashblade, formerly Reginald, leading a pottery class for guards and prisoners. His latest creation, a lopsided vase that looked like it had been made during an earthquake, was being praised by everyone as emotionally expressive. "It represents my inner struggle with authority figures," Vorn explained to Guard Captain Draven, who was nodding with the serious attention of someone genuinely interested in artistic interpretation. In the recreation area, they found Globe the Unspeakable serving as referee for a chess tournament between guards and prisoners. The blob creature had somehow acquired a whistle and was making official-sounding calls in a language that consisted entirely of gurgles and pops, which everyone seemed to understand perfectly. But the real shock came when they reached the isolation block and found Cell 447B surrounded by a crowd of guards and prisoners, all sitting in a circle on the floor, listening with rapt attention to someone speaking from inside the cell. "And that's why communication is so important in any relationship," came Daniel's voice through the cell's communication system. Whether it's romantic, professional, or just friendship, you have to be willing to really hear what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk. "That's brilliant," said Guard Holt, scribbling notes on a datapad. "My daughter tried to tell me something similar last week, but I wasn't really listening." "It's never too late to start," Daniel replied cheerfully. "The beautiful thing about relationships is that they can always get better if both people are willing to put in the effort." Inspector Vondrak pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling in real time. She stared through the observation window at Daniel, who was sitting cross-legged on his metal slab, apparently conducting an impromptu therapy session for half the prison staff. "Prisoner Reyes," she announced, her voice cutting through the group like a plasma blade. "I am High Inspector Yusara Vondrak of the Galactic Council. I need to speak with you immediately." Daniel looked up with the same bright smile he gave everyone. "Oh, hello. Nice to meet you, Inspector. I hope you're having a good day. Is there something I can help you with?" The words "help you with" seemed to short-circuit something in Inspector Vondrak's brain. She had inspected prisons on 47 different worlds, and no prisoner had ever offered to help her with anything except escaping or dying. "I need to understand what has happened to this facility," she said carefully. "According to my records, Grimhold 7 has historically had a prisoner fatality rate of 87%, a guard turnover rate of 200% annually, and has been classified as barely contained chaos by every previous inspection." "Oh my," Daniel said, looking genuinely concerned. "That sounds terrible. Is everyone okay now?" "That's what I'm trying to determine. Current observations suggest that this facility has somehow achieved a prisoner fatality rate of 0, guard turnover of 0, and what appears to be happiness." Daniel brightened. "Well, that's wonderful news. I'm so glad things have improved. The folks here really deserve better working conditions." The interrogation, if it could be called that, lasted 3 hours. Inspector Vondrak questioned Daniel with the intensity of someone trying to crack a galactic conspiracy, while Daniel answered every question with cheerful honesty and genuine concern for everyone's well-being. The final revelation came when Inspector Vondrak, in desperation, asked Daniel directly what his secret was. "Oh, there's no secret," Daniel said with a laugh. "I just treat people the way I'd like to be treated. Everyone here is doing their best in a difficult situation. A little kindness goes a long way." The inspection team convened in Warden Bruthak's office, where Inspector Vondrak delivered her findings with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire career had just been turned upside down. "Warden Bruthak," she began, consulting her notes with trembling appendages. "In 23 years of inspections, I have never encountered anything like this. Your facility has somehow achieved the impossible. 100% prisoner compliance, 0 violence incidents, perfect staff morale, and what can only be described as therapeutic breakthrough on an institutional scale." Bruthak nodded slowly, still trying to process the fact that his career was apparently being saved by a human who thanked people for arresting him. "Furthermore," Inspector Vondrak continued, "I am recommending you for immediate promotion to Regional Prison Administrator, with a mandate to implement these revolutionary rehabilitation methods across the entire galactic prison system." What? "The Galactic Council will want to study your techniques. You've accidentally discovered the most effective prisoner rehabilitation program in recorded history." When they offered Daniel early release as a reward for his contributions to galactic criminal justice reform, he politely declined. "Thank you so much for the offer," he said with genuine gratitude. "But I think I'd like to stay here as a consultant for a while. These folks have become like family to me, and I'd hate to leave just when things are getting interesting." Inspector Vondrak left Grimhold 7 with the first positive inspection report of her career and a deep, unsettling suspicion that she'd just witnessed something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy thought about criminal justice. And in Cell 447B, Daniel settled in for another evening of conversation with his friends, completely unaware that he had just accidentally revolutionized the entire concept of prison reform. 6 months later, Grimhold 7 had become the most sought-after assignment in the Galactic Prison Service. What had once been a posting that guards received as punishment was now a career destination that required a waiting list, 3 references, and a psychological evaluation to ensure applicants were emotionally stable enough for the Daniel Reyes experience. Regional Prison Administrator Bruthak, still adjusting to his new title and the parade of visiting dignitaries who wanted to study his revolutionary methods, stood in his upgraded office watching the morning shift change through his panoramic windows. Instead of the grim march of defeated beings trudging to their posts, he observed guards practically skipping to work, competing for the privilege of covering Daniel's consultation hours. "Sir," came the voice of his new assistant, a perky Altarian named Pema, who had transferred specifically to work at the Happy Prison. "Guard Pharaoh and Guard Nile are having another scheduling dispute." Bruthak sighed, a sound that had become considerably less menacing over the past months. "Let me guess. They both want the afternoon shift with Daniel." "Actually, sir, it's worse. They've formed a coalition with Guards Holt, Ossick, and Rennick. They're calling themselves the Daniel Appreciation Society, and they've submitted a formal request to extend his consultation hours to include weekends." Through his window, Bruthak could see the source of all this administrative chaos. Daniel was in the recreation area, apparently teaching a group of former assassins, pirates, and war criminals how to play something called volleyball. The sight of Vorn Ashblade, formerly Reginald, spiking a ball while shouting encouragement to his teammate, Globe the Unspeakable, was something that Bruthak's brain still refused to fully process. The transformation had attracted galactic attention. Bruthak's communication console chimed constantly with requests from other prison facilities. The Titan Detention Center wanted to know if they could borrow Daniel for a weekend workshop. The Nebula Correctional Facility was offering to trade 3 guards and a new gravity generator for a 2-week human consultation program. The Void Station Maximum Security Complex had submitted a formal petition to the Galactic Council requesting their own Class 15 Deathworld rehabilitation specialist. "Sir," Emma continued, consulting her datapad with the efficiency that had made her Bruthak's favorite assistant in decades, "we've also received 17 more applications for guard positions, 6 research proposals from xenopsychology departments, and what appears to be a marriage proposal addressed to Daniel from someone calling themselves Princess Navarra of the Scarlet Expanse." "A marriage proposal?" "She says his compassion and wisdom have reached her even across the void of space, and she wishes to bear his offspring to spread his gentle influence throughout the galaxy." Bruthak rubbed his temples with all 4 of his hands. "File it under things I never thought I'd have to deal with as a prison administrator." The most remarkable change was in the prisoners themselves. The facility's rehabilitation rate had reached an unprecedented 94%. Former criminals were requesting extended sentences so they could complete Daniel's life skills workshops. 3 prisoners had turned down parole to continue their personal growth journey. Scar 9 had not only stopped thinking he was a plant, but had enrolled in correspondence courses for horticultural therapy, planning to become an actual plant specialist upon his release. The irony was not lost on Bruthak that his most successful prisoner was also his most mysterious. Despite months of friendship and daily conversations, Daniel had somehow never mentioned the details of his original crime. Everyone simply assumed that someone classified as Class 15 Deathworld must have done something appropriately terrifying. It was Guard Holt who finally asked the question during one of Daniel's afternoon consultation sessions. "Daniel," Holt said, settling into his usual spot outside cell 447B with a cup of tea that Daniel had somehow taught the kitchen staff to brew. "We've been friends for months now, but you've never told us what you were convicted of. What did you do that got you classified as Class 15? Daniel looked genuinely confused. "Oh, I'm not classified as Class 15 because of my crime. I'm classified as Class 15 because I'm from Earth. That's just the automatic designation for anyone from a death world." "But what was your actual crime?" Daniel's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. "Well, this is kind of awkward. I was sentenced to 30 days for jaywalking." The silence that followed was so complete that the asteroid's life support system seemed loud by comparison. "Jaywalking," Holt repeated slowly. "Yeah, I crossed the street without using the designated pedestrian zones on Station Alpha 7. Apparently, it's a more serious offense in space than it is on Earth." The judge said I was flagrantly disregarding established traffic safety protocols and gave me a month in minimum security to reflect on the importance of civic responsibility. 30 days, Guard Nile whispered. You were supposed to be here for 30 days. Right, but then everyone was so nice, and there was all this interesting work to do, and I really felt like I was making a difference. When they offered early release, I asked if I could stay and help instead. I've been having the time of my life. Later that evening, Administrator Bruthok sat in his office, staring at Daniel's original sentencing documents, which had somehow never crossed his desk during the chaos of the past months. 30 days for jaywalking. The most dangerous prisoner in Galactic history was a human who had crossed the street in the wrong place and then voluntarily extended his stay because he liked helping people. Sir? Hema's voice came through the intercom. The Galactic Council is on line 1. They want to discuss expanding the Daniel Reyes model to all maximum security facilities across the galaxy. Bruthak looked out his window at Daniel, who was now leading what appeared to be a group meditation session in the courtyard. Former killers, thieves, and war criminals sat in peaceful silence, following breathing exercises taught by a man whose greatest crime was improperly crossing a street. Take a message, Bruthak said finally. Tell them I'll call them back when I figure out what the hell just happened to my prison. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, he never would.